Halo teman-teman semua, selamat datang ke Lead Film di Jakten 2020, Jakarta Content Week. Hari ini kita kedatangan tamu-tamu, ada yang dari dekat, tetangga-tetangga gitu ya, dari negara tetangga, dan ada satu teman yang datang dari jauh, dari benua yang lain. Dan sesi ini akan diadakan dalam bahasa Inggris. So I will switch to English now. Welcome, dear friends and audience. You arrived in a lit film session of Jakarta Content Week 2020. We will start our discussion in a session called The Stories Behind the Pictures, Insights to a Changing Industry. With us, we have some colleagues from film industry in different countries. I have here Amir Muhammad from the neighboring country, Malaysia. I have Tatiana Leite from a faraway land, Brazil. And Sarida Lena from the Philippines. This entire session will be conducted in English. You can ask your questions using the chat box of this Zoom room. And my name is Lisa Bonarahman. I will be the moderator for this session. I'm a film archivist and a film programmer by profession. Sometimes people ask me, what is a film programmer? Do you actually write computer codes? I don't. A film programmer is somebody who picks films to be screened to an audience. For example, at this Jakarta Content Week in Lit Film, you also see a program called Lit Film Screen. So my job is to choose films, for example, to be screened to you in Jakarta Content Week. So please don't ask me anymore if I write computer programming codes. All right, so a little bit of an introduction to our discussion today. Film industry around the world also, like other industries, is facing a big change. There is a major change because of the Internet of Things. We are forced to think very differently about how we produce films and how we screen films. And then there is a more immediate change, which is the global pandemic that forces the film industry to go to a place where I think it's very unique in the entire history of film industry. So in this panel, we will encounter stories from different parts of the world and see what are the strategies used by my colleagues here in trying to keep the film industry afloat in each place. I would like to hear from our speakers today about how they are doing as filmmakers in the current situation, and we will learn more about their surrounding film scene and film culture. So I would like to start introducing them. I will start with the male panelist in this session, Amir Muhammad. If we could see Amir Muhammad on screen, please. Amir Muhammad comes from Malaysia. He has made films, both fiction and documentaries, since 2000. He is a partner of Dahuang Pictures, which is an award-winning film production company, and they tour around festival circuit a lot. In 2018, Amir started Kuman Pictures for what's called low-budget horror and thriller films. I'm quite excited actually to be hearing about this because I think our reality is horror enough. And he also, Amir is also in the publishing industry. He founded Buku Fiksi in 2011. And even if it's a quite young publishing house, it has published over 200 books already. So very productive. Our second panelist today is Sarida Lena from the Philippines. Sari is both a scholar and a filmmaker. Sari also teaches at the University of Philippines. And she also make documentaries. One among the documentaries that is actually quite experimental, like not the kind of reportage or feature documentary that you used to see. So I'm also very curious about it. I hope I'll see it in the near future. Is a documentary called Darling Nick, which is on an artist called Nick Joaquin from the Philippines. We will hear more from Sari about how is it to make documentaries in the Philippines today. The third one is Tatiana Leite from Brazil. Tatiana is currently with us from Paris in France. It is also an interesting question what she is doing in France at the moment and not in Brazil. Tatiana actually started out as a film programmer, like myself. And then she worked at the time for the Rio Film Festival in Brazil. And in 2012, she created a production company called Bubbles Project. And she already produced 5 films. Among them is Loveling. I hope I pronounced this correctly. Benzinho. Yes, and this film was already sold to 22 countries. I hope Indonesia will become the next. And she is currently, or maybe we should hear if the project is still in the pipeline or already finished. She's working with a director called Julia Murat, with a project that she pitched in Berlin's co-production market last year called Rule 34. All right, so let's start. I would like to ask lots of questions to all 3 of you, and so I will be because we can only show you one at a time, not everybody at the same time. So I will be mentioning who this question is addressed to, but of course you're welcome to like, hey, I want to answer that question too. You can also say something. All right. Let's start with somebody the furthest away from Indonesia, Tatiana. How would you describe situation of filmmaking during the pandemic in Brazil?
Actually, I cannot talk about Brazil in the pandemics without talking about the political context. We unfortunately have a president for the latest almost 2 years now that decided to ignore the pandemic and made our situation a lot worse than most of the places. In fact, his politics started to ruin the cultural sector before the pandemics arrived, because one of his first measures was extinguish the Minister of Culture, and we used to have from the latest 25 years a very strong cinema agents called Ancine, and since he got in power, the agents started to reduce its finance, and we heard about some censorships with projects, among other things. And lately, actually, since the pandemic arrived, it's completely stopped. So the situation in Brazil right now is very dramatic because there are even rumors that the cinema agents will be ended. And they owe a lot of money for several producers and distributors, and from projects that everybody already won the context, the public calls, but it's, you know, the response is very slow, and it, of course, it's not. We see that it's not something that it's about the functionaries. It's something that comes from directly from the government, and I think for several sectors, Brazil is like this, going back forwards. And with the pandemic, everything just became faster, and well, it's a disaster. Resuming, it's really, really the worst panorama that I can remember, because I was, when I was born, it was kind of the end of the dictatorship, and I'm, a Brazilian who saw hopes for a democracy and a brilliant future, because with all the potential of the country. And then all of a sudden, after the coup d'etat, the impeachment of the former president, we saw a chain of things that led to this disaster. And of course, for us from audiovisual, it's really really sad, because in the latest years, Brazilian cinema finally achieved a diversity and an integration in the whole world that we haven't seen before. So we are producing a lot of films. We are having some market share in Brazil, which was something not, after a long time. And we were in the main film festivals with a very strong presence. For example, this year we had something like 16 films at Berlinale.
Yeah.
And now we are living with this uncertainty and fear of what's going to happen with us in cinema, but with the country itself. So that's the situation nowadays with the pandemic. The cinemas closed for several months, more than 6 months, and they just reopened a month ago.
Yeah.
And they,
So actually, what you're describing to us is something like a mix between natural disaster and political disaster.
yeah,
Oh, okay. Let's hear from Amir if you know the the problem is similar in
Um,
Malaysia.
okay. Am I on screen? Okay.
Not yet, but you can speak.
Okay. Oddly enough, we also did have a kind of a coup in Malaysia. The government changed. What month was it? Was it March? I think the government changed, but it was all done as a kind of a trading between the elites. It was done in a hotel, an expensive hotel called Sheraton. So it's known as the Sheraton move. So it's not some groundswell of support. Malaysia does not have really much of a culture of protests, of street protests. We're quite docile, I suppose. But people were very angry. But people didn't want to leave the house to express the anger, because that was at the start of the pandemic. There was already cases there. So in a matter of days, the entire government changed. And we had in power some ministers who, they had never been ministers before, and suddenly they were handling these portfolios, including the health minister, who didn't make themselves look very competent. One of the things the health minister said at the start is that I just had a Zoom call with health ministers from 500 countries. So people were wondering where these extra 400 countries came from. So, and he also went on TV and said, to cure the virus, we should drink warm water because water will like chase away the virus. And he's actually a doctor by training. He's a dentist, so it's kind of odd. Everything locked down in March 18, which is a date I remember because a film I produced was supposed to open on March 19, the day after. So of course it was postponed. So cinemas were closed for like 3 months. It affected the film industry greatly because most film workers are freelancers, so they don't have like regular salaries to depend on. So even to get these benefits from the government, it was a bit complicated because you cannot show you have employment history and things like that. So it was a tough few months for everybody. And cinemas gradually opened in July when the cases started going low. At one stage, we had like close to zero per day. And then that was when we released our film in August. And it was a time of social distancing where cinemas had to be 50% full, like every other seat has to be empty. So we played in cinemas for 5 weeks, which sounds great, but actually not many people per screen because people were still scared to go out. But at least we can say, wow, we played for 5 weeks. Normally we would not be able to say that. Normally after the second week, we will be kicked out. And that film has already finished its screen run. But what I would like to highlight is that something I did because people were so bored at home, including me. My company started a short film challenge for people to make short films at home. And we gave people only like 2 weeks to submit. And I thought we would get maybe 50 entries, but we got over 200. And most
Wow,
of them,
that's a lot of bored people, Amir.
yeah. So most of them were literally one person alone at home filming themselves because the theme is it had to be a horror or thriller. So of course there were a lot of ghosts and there were a lot of serial killers and knives and all that. But I think it cheered people up for a while because they were doing this short film challenge. And then when it looked like cases were getting better, and then this government took part in a state election in Sabah, which is in East Malaysia. And directly because of that, actually, the cases went up again because there was all this political campaigning, and Sabah is a state with a lot of undocumented migrants from the Philippines. So these are people who do not want to surrender themselves to the hospital, right? For obvious reasons, they don't have papers. So it became this political and medical pandemic at the same time. So, and people from Sabah, when they flew back to the peninsula, they kind of brought the cases with them. So the cases started going up. So now it is like record numbers, higher than it has ever been. Like every day would be about 1,000, which it never was before. So everything closed down again. So in the capital city and in the main state, Selangor, all cinemas are now closed again. And we don't really know until when. They say until December 7, but it may be extended. And financially, it's also tough because the film we released in August, we have not received a single cent because cinemas are waiting. They are using the COVID as an excuse, but we're going ahead to shoot something anyway. So that's kind of a snapshot of things. Yeah.
Yeah, I would like to come back to that preparation of shooting that you're doing later. But let's hear from Sari, like what's the news from the Philippines in this crazy time? I mean, we also probably hear lots of news about the very unique political situation that the Philippines is in. Now let's hear what kind of cocktail they have now between the politics and this pandemic disaster. Please, Sari.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, definitely the pandemic has changed the film landscape forever. And as we speak, we have about 400,000 cases or infections. And we are experiencing so far the last 8 months of lockdown here in the Philippines, which I think is the world's looking at lockdown. And it has been very brutal. Definitely, there has been less shoots, and most of the TV channels that is still running now, they've been repeating the same old series from years ago on prime time because there's no new materials ready for airing. And I'll be very specific about the what we're trying to do now, of course, with the safety protocols and the requirements of the lock-in shooting, the COVID test, PCR, disinfection protocols. It drove up all the budgets by 30%, and that budget increased yeah, halted many productions, so only big producers can really afford to continue working at this time. And the first productions that restarted were of course commercials, but they were very much stripped down. Directors work remotely and only the camera crew can go on location. And I've heard that some of these commercial directors even resorted to filming, working with with their own family members as talents for their advertising projects.
Oh,
Uh,
interesting. Like Iranian cinema.
Mm.
yeah, yeah. And some of the creative productions also decided to use the Zoom format as their show formats. And that has worked wonders for the recent BL. Have you heard of that? Boys Love. There's a
Oh
boys
yeah,
love craze here
oh,
in
yeah.
the Philippines.
Mm.
So what this meant was the shoots would happen in the actors' apartments or condo units, and the production designer would just send over the props or the furniture, and the actor would dress up his own studio. He would be his own set man and decorate his home and face the camera. He will also be his own camera person, of course, with the guidance of the director. So that's totally new. In terms of the when all these things happen, many filmmakers uh, took filmmaking, to the back seat, and we went all the way to help the film workers, especially those who are getting their daily wages. One of the wonderful initiatives that we did was the lockdown cinema, where you volunteer your films for fundraising, and that has been able to raise a lot of money and help our gaffers, assistant directors, and all those really relying on daily income. Politically, it's very much similar scenario like Brazil. A lot of filmmakers are very vocal, and they when they're not filming, they turn into social media, and they've been actively, yeah, uh, just being voicing out, expressing so much dissatisfaction, and not throwing away this resiliency that has been associated with being with Filipinos. We want accountability. We want responsibility, and this government is really the cause of many problems to us artists.
Hmm. Yeah, the Philippines, for the audience that maybe haven't really know the movement of protest culture in the Philippines is probably the most active protest culture in Southeast Asia. Like, we have Malaysia that, maybe is very chill in that department. Indonesia is catching up, but the Philippines, you don't mess with them.
Yeah,
So it
that's
is actually quite an interesting time right now in terms of how filmmaking scene is kind of reformulating their position, yeah, in politics. But I know that in the Philippines, for example, it is among a few countries in Southeast Asia that has a film development council. What do you think is the role of film council? Because we've heard Tatiana describe to us in Brazil, it's about to be scraped out after a period of really uh, dynamic life. Yeah, how is the situation in the Philippines in terms of support for filmmaking and producing in terms of money and subsidy?
Well, Film Development Council has been, I would say, very much in the situation of bringing many independent films in important festivals. You know, I give it to the the FGCP, um, and a lot of these educational and workshops and outreach for regional filmmakers and building the cinematheques has been very much um, the focus of this council. But what happened during the pandemic was quite interesting. A lot of most of the sectors from the independent film and mainstream cinema that normally they don't intersect because of the rising numbers of the infection, the guilds came together, you know, from the Directors Guild of the Philippines, and you have the cinematographers, the writers, the production designers, assistant directors, and production managers. They all came together and crafted the safety protocols as a guide. We've been trying to work with the FDCP for, you know, putting this together, but there has been some kind of some tensions there, and I have to be very honest about it. But it was the good thing that came out of this was all it unified us, the sectors. That has never happened before. And now what we have to do is to continue working with this government sectors and making sure that we are participating, we are actively uh, heard, because normally we are um, we are isolated. So at this point, we make sure that um, we, we are part of that formation.
Mhm.
It's a very sensitive topic, but we are getting there.
I
So
understand, but I'm glad to hear that as much as the situation is making it difficult for you guys, but you also find a way to fuel solidarity. That's fantastic to hear. That you're closer in some aspects to one another than never before. You said.
yes,
I think
very
that's
much.
that's really good news. Um, Amir earlier said a little bit about how the flow of money in the industry is kind of interrupted. Is it also the same case for you, Tatiana, in terms of maybe revenues, if you have any films currently being distributed, or production? I would like to hear from Tatiana what's the situation in terms of, money.
Mhm. First of all, I'll just make a comment that I'm very impressed with Sari's description of the situation there towards filmmaking during the shooting, because it's very similar. I would say that I could have, said that about Brazil. All the layers that you mentioned, the protocols, the fact that it raises the budget for somehow 30%, making independent productions impossible. Only the big commercial films sponsored by Netflix or Amazon could retake the shooting. The collectives to help the film crew. We had different crowd funds and initiatives to help the people that use to work with audiovisual there, and also a gather of different syndicates and guilds to try to get together and think about how to protect the industry. So I'm very impressed because it's really very close to Brazil. In terms of cash flow, well, it's tricky because first of all, the new funds were not opened. The old funds that people already won hasn't been paid. So of course, for the streamings channels, it is a big opportunity because there's this big gap in the market. So there are a lot of Amazon arrived recently in Brazil. Netflix was already there, and there is a local new streaming TV also growing. So, in fact, for those things are still working. Of course, they are always looking for more commercial and less artistic projects. But a lot of things started to happen again. For cinemas, it's a disaster because they reopened more than a month now, and no one is going to the theater. So for the small theaters chains, it's the art house ones. They are shutting the doors. So so it is. There are still some things happening, but very specifically, like big things. I love to hear Amir initiative. We had some cultural centers opened for initiatives, similar initiatives. But of course, the whole chain is affected. It's the theater, the exhibitors, the distributors, and of course the producers, all the filmmakers.
Yeah, it's well, first of all, it is very ironic to hear that Amazon, like Amazon, the company, arrived in Brazil, finally, where there is already Amazon. The river, I mean, in case you don't understand. Anyways, yes, some people say if you want to look at reality in a certain sector, you need to follow the money, like how it's going around in an industry. Last year, for example, the report from the Indonesian film producers, it's not an official report, more like statements in discussion, that the income that a film gets from internet platform would make up very small portion of revenue from film, less than 5%. So the biggest income was still coming from cinema theaters. Can you tell me, maybe I'll start with Amir again. Can you tell me if this situation changed in the meantime? Like, do you see more money coming or flowing from the internet platforms or online film exhibition?
For us in Malaysia, the big winner in this time of lockdown is Astro, because Astro is our biggest privately owned media channel. They have many TV channels and radio channels and radio stations. And they have this platform called Astro First, which is actually a video on demand platform. And quite a few films, I think at least 10 so far, that was supposed to come out in the cinema, they sort of pivoted and debuted in Astro First instead, because they needed that quick turnover. And some of them did quite well. In fact, there was a movie for Eid for Lebaran, which like phenomenal. It's like hundreds of thousands of people subscribe to watch this quite a simple family comedy, which probably more people would have seen it on TV compared to if it had opened in cinema, probably. And another success story also on Astro is there's a movie from Kelantan, which is a state with no cinema because it is a very Islamic conservative kind of state. But there are some very popular YouTubers from that state. So this particular popular YouTuber made a comedy and it broke records when it showed on Astrophus because it had gathered a following all these years through its very simple, homely kind of YouTube content. And that's the sort of thing people are willing to watch. So those are the few success stories. So in terms of internet platform, not many Malaysian films are commissioned by Netflix, unfortunately, because the algorithms show that Malaysian content is not like seen by Malaysians on Netflix. But there was a successful Malaysian Netflix movie recently. It's called Pasal Kau as a romantic comedy. So that became like the most successful one. So hopefully that will pave the way for others. And also something disastrous was there was a Malaysian originated platform called iFlix, which kind of closed operation and now owes millions of dollars to producers in Malaysia and Indonesia. So it's kind of embarrassing that this is our Malaysian export this company that owes money to people, and it has rebranded and it is under no obligation to pay off its debts because now it's taken over by a new owner.
Oh, wow, that's convenient.
Yeah, legally they're not obliged to. It's an owner from China now. So so which is kind of odd because people are stuck in this situation where, well, we need to pitch, but do we pitch to the same company that still owes us money, even though the owners are different? So it's kind of tough. And yeah, but I think the future is definitely there will be a lot more streaming stuff, a lot more of that because people will still be very wary of going to crowded places. And except for the really blockbuster kind of things which are kind of spectacle, right? So smaller, more intimate kind of movies, yeah, why not just go to this platform, even though you have to sacrifice a few things. You have to sacrifice a kind of cinematic kind of feel, but I think at this time now people are really kind of well, kind of desperate, I suppose, because if they have all this content, they need to do something with it. So even our third movie, we're thinking of just giving it to streaming straight away because we don't know when cinemas will really open again.
Yes, maybe you could also, just to finish up, can describe in very brief way, what is the difference for you as a film producer or filmmaker in general to be screened on in a cinema and in a digital platform? You touched on it a little bit there. There is something to sacrifice. I think I would need you to describe that so that because for us this move is not seamless.
Right. Because who was it? Some very smart person said that all movies end up being mobile movies because every movie in the world, no matter how big, it will end up being a few years later, some kid will be watching it on their handphone, right? So this kind of thing where it's only for one medium, that is kind of a 20th century idea, I guess. For our second film in particular, Raw, it was the director's choice that he wanted it to show on the big screen because it was shot in that way. It was shot to feel that you are in a forest and you are trapped in this forest and there's some evil spirit lurking around. And it's not a very fast-paced movie. So it's meant to be a very immersive kind of experience. So we're kind of glad that we had that opportunity. But for other kind of movies that are more just in terms of logistics, very, in enclosed spaces, that kind of thing. Normal, more close-ups and that kind of thing. It's not so difficult to imagine it working just as well in a streaming kind of format.
So it really directly affects aesthetics, yeah.
Yes.
How you see film and how you immerse your audience in your pictures. Sari, I would like to just hear from you whether or not, first of all, I mean, people always think that documentaries is a genre that is very closely related to broadcasts. Is that still so? And is there anything that kind of shakes the scene of documentary when it comes to moving to the online exhibition platform?
Yeah, yeah, I would love to talk about something related to documentaries here in the Philippines. Maybe I could start with saying that, first of all, the ritual of going to the movie theater, the pandemic really accelerated the death of cinema. So, of course, this resulted in film distribution and festivals migrating online. The beauty of online festivals is that they granted access to many people, especially for us documentary filmmakers, and access also to the far-flung regions and provinces far from Manila, the ability to watch films that were inaccessible before. We saw this happen quite recently in the concluded the Ang Docu Documentary Film Festival, which had a successful run despite the pandemic. Filmmakers, speakers, guests, and audience in the thousands showed up. But what we encountered in bringing documentary, which has very is in a way is a niche audience. Um, One of the major difficulty was, of course, the access to the festival sites because the sites also want to protect the films from piracy, and you have yeah, YouTube and TikTok that provides free entertainment and content. I would like to cite a recent prestigious documentary film, Aswang. Aswang is about the current extrajudicial killings that have been happening the last few years in our country. And this film was intended to be shown theatrically, but as the pandemic situation kept on going, the producer decided to stream it for free for a limited time. But the irony was, even though it was streamed for free, it was still pirated. So, that's really sad. All right. And so this is the problem when the audience feels that because YouTube is free, then all other contents should be free. And it's hard to fight to have the audience pay to watch simply because they have other options to consume free content. And so what the producers are doing now, they package not one film, but a few movies in one. So streamers are more likely to buy. And if you're lucky, if you're able to sell it to multiple territories, but for a better price. But since most Filipinos films are only available for Philippines, those are sold at a very low price. I talked to one of the producer last night. She handled one of our filmmakers whose film has gone to Cannes and Rotterdam. She said they were able to sell to a regional streaming service, but for a very, very low price. It's hard to compute it because the film was not really for a commercial mainstream release, but she was able to sell it for about 2 to 3%. That's very low.
Yes, I'm actually before I go to Tatiana, I do want to emphasize what you are saying here is that essentially the available online screening platform is more made for entertainment purposes, like home entertainment, whereas I think all three of you represent a different idea about film, cinema, and making films. In Indonesia, we have like a street slang term for this, in which films are divided into film komersil, which is commercial films, and film festival, which is more like art house films, but nobody calls it art house film in Indonesia. We call it festival films. And Tatiana, I mean, you are one of the most successful producers, let's say, in the contemporary world when it comes to producing art house films. So we're not talking about blockbusters here, but films that really travels slowly to different regions and act almost like a traveler in the Silk Road era. Yeah, that slowly hops from one place to another and communicate with different audience. How do you feel about this switch from cinema to online platform?
Mhm. Well, personally, I had for me as a cinephile, I had a hard time with the with the arrival of the streaming. I remember when there was the polemic year of Cannes that they were showing premiering films in Cannes competition, and then Netflix will be, launching the films on the following, days. For me, the sensation of being in a movie theater can't be coped with whatever I'm gonna watch in my house, But I think we have to face that during the pandemic, this somehow changed because all of a sudden I saw myself watching a lot of films on streamings, different streamings, and I think it really attended. And what happened, I don't know how it was in Malaysia and in Philippines, is that in Brazil, several festivals they made crowdfunds to still exist during this year, and they made their online versions, and they were very successful. So people were really looking for content, and this is for me that maybe will allow the big those big streaming such as Netflix to think that maybe it will be interesting for them to have an art house arm, not only being interested by the commercial titles. uh, I think that will, of course, could be productive for everybody, if that happens. The only thing, personally, I think I would still fight for the theater exhibition, even if it's in parallel, or if we can have the maintain the festival traveling for a film, and then when it comes out, it can come out simultaneously in the theaters and on VOD, and then it will be up to the people to choose how they want to see it. I don't like as an obligation, and I think I'll be very militant for the film theaters to endure this. I happen to be here in France, and right now we are confined, but I had 2 weeks previously from the confinement for my arrival, and I managed to watch 8 films in theaters here, and
Wow.
very differently from Brazil. There was a regular programming for the theaters, and a few times, for example, I tried to see Thomas Vinterberg film Drunk, the latest one, and I arrived 1 hour before the screening, and it was sold out. So that it's, I think in this sense, France is the country who gives more attention and importance for the film theaters. And I'm, trying to observe a little bit their moves. How, of course, it's a political a culture that they they really try to leave the cinemas open during the whole process, the longest time, because they understand how it's important for the citizen, for people here. And I'm very impressed when I hear from exhibitors friends from Brazil that people are not attending the screenings, and when I think that here I had some sold out screenings, and even there was a old retrospective of an American independent filmmaker from the 50s, in the room in their capacity of 50%, it was also full, so
Yes,
this,
so people don't are not really afraid, yeah,
yeah,
to go to the cinemas.
because it's cinema for them. it's urgency as it is as important as going to walk in the park or going to the supermarket. And I think this is culture, and I really would like to observe a little bit how to spread that in Brazil. You know what I mean? Because
Yes.
it gives hopes, of course, when you see it. And I don't think, I'm not against at all about streaming channels. Actually, they were very helpful for me during the confinement, but I think it can't exclude the cinema theaters.
Yes, I completely agree. I mean, I see this internet streaming platform as a different channel altogether. I don't see it as either or. I love to see that cinema theater in physical sense can coexist with streaming platform, because just like what Sari earlier mentioned, yeah, if you come from an archipelago like the Philippines or like Indonesia, where the distribution of cinema theaters is very, very uneven between big cities and smaller cities or capital city and more remote areas, then actually internet platform can be a blessing as well. Like we could reach audience that we formerly couldn't really reach simultaneously. Of course, we can always have like traveling cinema, yeah, like in the oldest sense of the word, but it's not always easy to operate it, and it's costly in an archipelago because you have to sail across the sea basically. So yes, I noticed that the pandemic actually kind of bring into a stronger contrast, yeah, what is happening in our industry in terms of the difference between bigger capitals in the film producing sector and cinema as well, in comparison to the small one. Now I have my last round of the question. I mean, I would also welcome you, like any of you who want to ask questions to another, of course. So if you have anything that you want to ask one another, yeah, you're very much welcome. But I would like to just expand on what Tatiana has described earlier about observing, the cinema culture in France, where cinema seems to be yeah, something next to food or drink, like people, it's like the air that people breathe, yeah. They the moment that cinema opens, they'd like flock into it. Just shortly, could you, Amir and Sari, explain, maybe like 1 minute each, how is it, how would you describe cinema culture um, in the surroundings around you?
Uh,
What kind of things, what kind of relation people have with cinema?
I think cinema is encapsulated by the long chat you have after watching the movie when you go to a restaurant that is open all night long. And I think that is the true community spirit. Because while watching it, you may be annoyed because some people, they have their handphones on, and then some baby is crying somewhere. So the experience can be a bit annoying. But that in itself becomes part of the material where you go and you discuss it with people later. And then, of course, online there is that geek culture and all that. But I think, yeah, the essence of cinema is what you and your friends talk about after you watch it. I think that's it. That's a very homely answer, I think.
Yeah, what about you, Sari?
Well, first of all, the Philippines has been historically Americanized. So
Mm.
even if we are the first in the region to have cinema, we just celebrated 100 years of
Yeah,
cinema a few
that's
years ago.
true.
Yes, but still, Hollywood does take up much of the screens. So our local tastes tend to revolve around romances and comedies with the occasional horror film or holiday fantasy film. So our festival film do quite well abroad, but it caters to different tastes than in general audience. Oh, okay, but there is a new regional intersection happening with productions, and this is one avenue that we always love to explore. But in terms of the culture or the ritual of cinema going, that has been lost. The reason why people break traffic, spending for parking and spending for eating out is because of the communal aspect of film going, and that experience is hard to replicate today. So even if you have now the watch parties with friends, it is not the same primarily because of the usual poor internet and other technical issues. So that said, with the closure of cinemas, this has given some form of equity to all productions, big or small, since they are now on the same platform, which is the internet. And for me, this is one step towards the slow dismantling of the monolithic commercial Hollywood-centric system of film exhibition. I think it's a good step forward.
No, very well put, Sari.
Cool.
Yes, I do agree. Even though, of course, we have to make note of what you just said, the disparate, this discrepancy of internet access that is clearly not the same and not equal all over the world, and the risk of your content being screened, viewed, or enjoyed with very little connection to you. Like when I think about piracy, I actually because I don't make films, I don't spend money making films, so the way I think of it is very different. I actually learn a lot from pirated films, but the thing that I feel that I miss so much when I access something outside of the legal platform is that I miss this connection to the people who created it, who bring their life into it. And I think internet poses this big challenge for us of how to stay connected, like not to say only about illegal downloading or copyright issue. It's not only that. It's about connection to artists and filmmakers that we have to struggle and redefine how to establish it in such a impersonal and virtual world like the internet, right? Yes, so I'm afraid that we don't really have much time left. I really enjoy our conversation, and it is not every day that I get to hear so much news and very, very personal news from different parts of the world like this. And I also hope that our audience that we cannot see because it's virtual, hello, over there, also enjoyed our conversation. I would like to thank you all very much for making the time and sharing with the audience in Jakarta, and probably also there are some friends who are just like us logging in from different places from around the world. I hope right now maybe the situation seems to be very, very tough and challenging, but I would still want to say good luck for all of you. Please take care and stay healthy. And I look forward to seeing you and your films again in the relatively near future.
Okay,
Thank you so
thank
much,
you.
Lisa.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much,
you.
Sarida, for the discussion.
Finish.
Yay! Thank you.
Oh, we should have joined the cosplay fest instead.
You can, Amir. if you want, because the cosplay session will happen tomorrow and the day after tomorrow. Yeah, I can ask to give you access to join the competition.
That would be fun.
Yeah, I really sincerely hope that you guys can continue well with the filmmaking and all. on the festival side is really tough right now, and we are, in Jakarta, well, Amir and Tatiana has been to our micro cinema.
Yeah.
I'm sad to announce that we are about to lose that space.
Oh no.
Really?
Yes,
Mediaindonesia.com hadir
because
dengan
we
opini
cannot really
cerdas dan
afford
narasumber
the
kredibel,
rent,
mudah
and,
diakses, informasi berkualitas
and
ada di genggaman Anda.
the owner changed
Klik
as
link
well,
browser
the
Anda,
management changed, and now they want
www.mediaindonesia.com.
rented and we cannot afford it.
Oh,
Dan
So
temukan pandangan berbeda.
This is Kinosaurus.
Karena fakta
yes,
bisa sama,
Kinosaurus
sudut
will
pandang
close
boleh beda.
in
Oh,
December.
complex, including Aksara.
Mediaindonesia.com. Views
Yeah,
and
the
news.
whole Aksara will move. Yeah.
What a pity. But do you
Yeah.
think, Lisa, that you can move to somewhere else?
We're looking, but still we cannot afford like permanent cinema. So maybe we will restart as a pop-up, and we're trying to establish also a virtual alternative. Like for example, the program of films that you see in this Jack tent is from our virtual cinema. Hey, sorry, I think we need to clear out the room.
Yes.
Thank you all for joining today.
Thank you. It was a
Thank you.
pleasure.
Pleasure. Yeah.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.
Disiarkan lebih dari 20 televisi jaringan Jawa Pos Group. Jawa Pos TV, paling Indonesia.
Mulai lagi nih jam 6. Ini orang udah mau masuk. Bentar lagi. Halo Mr. David.
Halo Mas.
Oh iya, halo Mas. Aku kira orang luar loh tadi.
Kebebasan pers dan gelombang era digital menghadirkan ribuan
orang Indonesia,
bahkan
saya.
jutaan informasi dan data setiap harinya. Beragam data dan informasi berserak di
Rekaman
berbagai
masih-
tempat seiring dengan perubahan
bentar lagi,
dunia
coba.
yang bergerak
Ya.
begitu cepat.
Berarti saya
Media-media
nggak perlu
baru pun
ngelakuin apa-apa ya?
bermunculan, namun
Enggak,
kualitas informasi
nanti